Transformer is a new series of moderated panel discussions and learning opportunities focused on how cultural organizations, artists, creative technologists, and others are creating compelling digital experiences, engaging audiences, and building resilient strategies and models for the future. Transformer is curated and produced by Root of Two in partnership with Midtown Detroit, Inc. These convenings engage local, national, and international thought leaders over the course of 6 90-minute online Zoom sessions from April through June 2021. Midtown Detroit, Inc. is leading the Detroit Cultural Center Planning Initiative to reimagine the public space that connects a dozen cultural organizations across an 83-acre site. The initiative is developing a place-based digital strategy for the Detroit Cultural Center, designed to build needed infrastructure, advance institutional transformation, and present new models of visitor experiences empowered by technology.
So we're really here because no one should have to bootstrap sort of digital transformation alone. And so we really are thinking about how this can be an opportunity for us to learn and grow and work together as we sort of think about both the new realities and consequences of technology as they apply to the day-to-day work of being an arts and cultural organization or an educational organization or a development organization for a cultural district, as well as like really what it takes for us to sort of think through the kind of equitable kind of pieces around digital access and technology that we want to champion going forward. And so I think we have an amazing lineup of presenters to kick off this series. There will be a total of 6 series. I know there have been some things that have already been amplified in chat, but just as a verbal prompt and reminder, if you need the live transcript option, just make sure you click that button and you should be able to see captions. Because we really want this to be a dialogue between our sort of presenters as well as you who have gathered here as part of our kickoff audience, we want to make sure that you're either using the chat feature to make sure you get your questions in if you would like us to answer, if you would like us to ask them on your behalf, or if you would like to have the opportunity to be on camera and be in dialogue with our presenters when that session comes up, we want you to use the raise hand feature so that we can make sure that we get your camera turned on and you spotlit so that we can sort of do a dialogue. And so the one sort of thing that I am having to mention, given the current context in time, is unfortunately Guillaume Arnaud has not been able to join us. He had a family emergency today and had to miss out. So we are going to hopefully get him back for another one of our sessions because we believe our partners up north in Montreal have a lot to share with us. But we're sad to lose him. Equally, I hope you get a chance to check out the pre-recorded video by Susanna Bishop from Federation Square in Melbourne. It's already in the future there. They are at 7 a.m. this morning, and so she has opted to pre-record a special sort of talk and message all about the kind of digital transformation that's been happening at Federation Square. So I hope you check out those resources, which you can find on our new website devoted to this series, transformer.root2.com. And so without further ado, I'm going to really just turn things over to our panelists. We're going to kick things off with Vaughn Perry.
I'm Vaughn Perry, and I'm going to start off with, first of all, I am a Ward 8 resident of Washington, D.C., and I believe I'm a very good example of equity at work. And I say that because I am here today speaking with you all because of the sincere and authentic work that has been put into community engagement within my community. I work for an organization called the 11th Street Bridge Park. It is we are transforming an old vehicular bridge into a recreational park. And before there was any designs drawn up, before any engineer was hired, we literally had over 200 meetings really just asking the community, is this something that you want? And I was one of those members in the community at the time that said, that's never coming into my community because like we've already had promises broken like over generations, right? And so I always called it this mythical bridge park. But it was because of the genuine community engagement that was taking place. And when I say community engagement, I distinguish that from community outreach. For me, community outreach is you already have in your mind what you want to do, and you're just going and telling people this is what you're going to do and checking off, versus community engagement. You are involving community and the stakeholders from the very beginning, from the planning process throughout the implementation. And so it's because of that, those 200 meetings and really asking the community, is this something that you want? And then when the answer was yes, it was like, all right, well, we're not going to stop there. What do you want it to look like? And not just what color should the benches be, but like what should the price points be, and what kind of programming should take place on the park, and what do you have? And so we have things like outdoor performance and art space, and canoeing and kayaking, and a cafe, and all of those ideas came directly from the community. But we didn't stop there. As we were looking at work that was taking place across our city, and really that has taken place across our country, one thing that we realized was that oftentimes when development is coming in, it has some unintentional negative consequences. And I would say sometimes intentional negative consequences, like gentrification, like displacement. And so we wanted to work really closely with the community to come up with strategies to mitigate something like that from happening. So what came about from that was what we call our equitable development plan. It's 34 strategies that's focused between housing, workforce, small business, and cultural equity. And we have been implementing those strategies over the last 5 years. The final piece I will talk about before I hand it off is how we've had to shift over the last year. I've been talking a lot about community engagement. Well, community engagement has to look completely different from what it looked like over a year ago. And to be honest, I would say we probably should have been doing some of these things already. And so what this pandemic has caused us to do is to look at innovative ways to get into homes, to get into organizations, maybe that we weren't able to get into before. And my hope is that even once we come out of this pandemic, we will continue to some of these practices. But some examples of that we have what's called our Community Leadership Empowerment Workshops. It's a leadership course that really is focused on amplifying the voice and the power of community residents. So we had to take that curriculum and tweak it so that it could be virtual. And since that time, we've offered 2 classes virtually over the last year, which has gotten tremendous feedback. Another example is we have a home buyers club that we were seeing people face to face. We started to offer that virtually, and the attendance actually increased, because, some of the folks just weren't able to make it because, whatever, maybe it was transportation issues, or maybe it was they had to watch their kids. And so we were literally removing barriers, because we were forced to, but these are some things we probably could have thought about even before. And then the last thing I will share is our Anacostia River Festival that we've been doing for the last 5 years. We couldn't do it last year, of course, but we are doing it this year virtually. You all are in luck. It's actually happening this Sunday. And so if you want to learn more about it, it's bridgepark.org/ARF. Please join us this Sunday as we celebrate our river, as we celebrate the community. We just really have a good time with our residents. Thank you all for having me today.
Thanks, Vaughn. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Debbie Berry. I'm the Vice President of Community Development for University Circle Incorporated. University Circle Incorporated is the nonprofit development, service, and advocacy organization for Cleveland's Education, Medical, and Cultural District, with over 40 nonprofit organizations that sit in 1 square mile. As an organization, we've been around for over 64 years. We do a number of different things. We do real estate development, we do transportation services, we have our own police department, we do advocacy and marketing for our institutions, and we really collaborate and bring everyone together on a number of different initiatives. One of the other things that we do as a nonprofit organization is education programming. We have different programs for pre-kindergarten through senior citizens that link our residents and our community to our cultural institutions. Of course, when COVID hit, some of that linking became so much more challenging because we couldn't bring people into the institutions. They closed, the school closed, people had time on their hands, and we had to find other ways to help educate our community and connect them to the assets that we have in the Circle. So we developed a new program, a virtual program called Circle Connects. It was sponsored by one of our local banks, PNC, and it was a series of digital offerings that helped connect the communities around us in a way that they had not been connected before. I'm going to go through just a couple of the different program opportunities that we had as part of Circle Connects and talk a little bit about how those benefited everyone. So we did a Circle food tour. Another thing that was struggling as COVID started was some of our restaurants. They had to close down. They weren't doing the business with takeout order, or they didn't have the employees to be able to do that. And so we worked with 6 local chefs who prepared meals online with the community. We raised funds, private dollars, to be able to pay the restaurants to put together a menu. People picked up the ingredients, and then they went home and they cooked with our chefs and made different meals. We had over 4,000 people participate in these different 6 activities. We also put public art outside. The center of our district is called Wade Oval, a public park similar but smaller than Central Park. We partnered with one of our member organizations, the Center for Arts Inspired Learning, to support artists in creating large-scale arts installations on Wade Oval that were called Voices on View. These art installations address timely themes, including immigration, racial injustice, education, and voting. In addition, we held several online conversations with the artists and had over 1,000 people participate in coming to see the art and talking about the art and the various stories and meanings that were behind them. Trying to keep everybody in shape, we also did a series called Shape Up in the Circle, where we held 30 virtual fitness sessions using local health instructors. We taped them outside and showed these on Saturdays and Sundays throughout the pandemic. We also created a program called Circle the Circle. And this was really just creating a series of maps that showed biking and walking routes that people could take throughout the district. We already had in place an outdoor interpretive signage program called Circle Walk, which has 40 different signs throughout the district telling about our history and innovation in University Circle. And so we crafted these maps and these routes so that people could come by those areas and learn on their own about things that were happening in the Circle. An additional program that we did was called Mobility in the Modern Era. This was a 4-part monthly digital transportation series covering pedestrian safety, shared mobility, innovation, and business partnerships in transportation. Realizing again that people were getting to work in different ways and needed different information about different mobility options, we brought in experts from across the country to talk to the community. Overall, we had over 5,000 people participate in all of our different programs. I think we really made a difference. It helped a lot that we already had connections to the community through our schools, so we were still able digitally to reach out to families and students and help them continue to participate in the programs that we had moving forward. We also distributed about 500 arts kits to our public school families so that they could sit at home and learn on their own, learn with their children, spend time together. In addition, we passed out 218 meal kits that were different than the chefs, but so that people could make meals at home on their own. So really connecting to community in a whole different way and building partnerships that weren't necessarily face-to-face, but were supporting the needs of the folks that were living in the neighborhoods, but weren't able to get some of the same services that we had traditionally been able to produce. I also agree with Vaughn. I think that we will continue to use some of this same digital programming. It's just a larger, broader way to be able to connect with everybody. And we're excited that we're starting to see our institutions open back up again, and we're starting to see more vibrancy in the district as the schools are opening and people are coming back. But I think some of these other things we've learned have really been beneficial and will continue as an alternate track to actually being there in person.
That was a great introduction to, I think, all of the ways that you have both sort of, laid the groundwork for how you're really thinking about place, who you really serve, who you work with and for and through, and then also the way that you've had to kind of really think about pivoting and sort of moving very quickly as a result of the kind of pandemic and some of those things. So I'm going to ask a first question while everybody gets a chance to get their questions on deck. And I believe we already have one that's coming in. But I'd really like to know, how did you find the sort of engagement on the other end in terms of like how your sort of constituents and stakeholders and community residents really were able to sort of feel, still connected to your organizations and to each other through the work that you were doing during the pandemic? And what, if anything, were some of the challenges that, either removed barriers through technology or actually, presented new challenges and new barriers as a result of technology?
I believe I'll start with the low-hanging fruit. What we found was we were able to do even more programming because the cost associated with holding a space or providing food, like we didn't have to worry about some of those things anymore. So it allowed for us to have even more programming virtually and to reach a larger audience. Another benefit to really shifting to virtual programming, I would say a benefit and a burden, was now we could expand our reach beyond our immediate community, right? And so that's great because we can get the word out and we can, show a model that we believe is working well and can work in other places. However, a lot of our work is really locally focused. And so just making sure that as we were expanding into a larger scope, we were still staying within that, or we were still being very intentional of having that local focus. Some of the barriers, certainly, there's a digital barrier, especially I would say it's not as much income based, but more generational, right? Where there are a lot of older communities that might have not known how to use Zoom or a platform like that, as well as as much as some others. And so being able to kind of work through that when we were finding the right platform to share with people that was very easy for people to access. But other than that, I believe in all of our programming, we probably have increased attendance, by going to a virtual setting. So it was just, and the last piece I'll share is how we can engage with them, right? And so as we're doing this virtual programming, how can we continue to do it in a way that's innovative, in a way that's interactive, in a way that's relevant, but also in a way where, we don't want to police what's going on in the chat, but in a way where, we can make sure that all of the information is staying positive. And fortunately, we've had really good experiences where folks have been engaged and, everybody is, all of our participants have kept has kept the conversations very positive.
And I'll echo a lot of the things that Vaughn said. Historically, some of the neighborhoods that surround University Circle have been lower income, have maybe not felt as welcome to the institutions in the circle. So I think having this opportunity to have them have their first foot in the door be a virtual foot, it was a little less intimidating. It seemed a little more welcoming. In the very beginning, I think we had, we were struggling with how do we do the outreach? How do we make sure we're connecting with people and letting them know this programming is available to them, that it's free, that they can come and pick up a meal and cook with a chef. So we had to build a base of connections with people and families to be able to help them understand that these opportunities were out there. But I think once they got into the system or tried one of our programs, then they became aware that there were a number of other things that were available to them too. And so we saw a lot of repeat performances, a lot of people talking to family members and having them engage. And so I think, again, as Vaughn said, we were able to open up our programming to so many more people at the same time really benefiting, on their own time. A lot of things were recorded, so you didn't have to necessarily watch it or participate when we had it scheduled. You could tune in later and see it on your own time, or jump in and out. So that was really beneficial. And I think we were also able to bring some more national expertise in. Whereas in the past, if we had done it live, we might have had capacity in terms of how many people we could get in a room to see a certain speaker. We'd have to pay that speaker to come. We found that people were very generous with their time and willing to come and participate and have conversations that we could then, open to the community. I think our biggest challenge was the digital divide, and ours was an economic digital divide and still is. Our public school system had to very quickly pivot and figure out how they were going to educate all these kids that did not have computer access, that did not necessarily have good access to Wi-Fi. Unlike Detroit, where your entire district is going to have that connection, we did not benefit from having that already installed. And so even our own office, we had to undergo some surgery to get a higher line coming into the office and get some more computers to folks. So that took some time to get up and running, but I think we and our institutions were very committed to making the connections and doing our best to provide opportunities or provide locations where people could go, even if the library was closed, but find a way to have that digital access, from a remote location. So it's still ongoing. I'd say there's still some connectivity issues, but we've gotten a lot better and we've been able to address a lot of the issues that we found from the very beginning.
I think that's so important. The two things that I sort of took away from this was the way that digital was really reinforcing the connections that you had already built, the relationships you had already built. They were sort of amplifying connections to place and to people. And that, in some cases, they were able to remove barriers either because of access, but also it meant that you had to think a lot more about the sort of access and sort of the affordances. And I think that's exactly where we are. We don't have the benefit of having public Wi-Fi yet. It's forthcoming, but I think that it's that very equity question that we, sort of were fortunate to partner very early on with our digital inclusion office in the city of Detroit to really try and amplify that part of the work. And we're fortunate that they're on our steering committee for the CCPI as well. So I want to bring in Matt, who's got another question on deck. So now everybody knows how this works. Don't be shy, right? Get your questions in.
Hey, thanks a lot. I'm Matt Greeno from the Detroit Historical Society, and we're obviously one of the cornerstone institutions with the Detroit Square Project. My question really was for Debbie. I'm so impressed with the University Circle collaboration, but like any finance guy, I'm always asking that question, how are we going to pay for it? I mean, you have a visitor center, you have some really good branding that unifies the whole area. And, we, the 11 institutions in our district are at various sizes in terms of budget and resources. And, it really emulates some of the discussion about, the economic divides that we were talking about in terms of patrons. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to what kind of models you're using to help fund and support, especially the unified branding and the visitor center and some of the innovative transportation solutions that you're using as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Matt, for the question. I appreciate it. So UCI as an organization is just over $10 million annual budget. We fund ourselves kind of a third, 1/3 through philanthropy and corporate donations, 1/3 through service payments. Our police department is paid for entirely by our institutional members, and that's been the model since the beginning when they started in 1959. And then we're funded 1/3 through real estate. We own residential, retail, and parking, and some vacant land. And so this year in particular, we've been very lucky that we've actually we've sold a couple of buildings because make some changes and to bring in some additional revenue. Parking has been a real challenge in terms of revenue this year. But a model we started a couple of years ago is working with private developers and doing long-term ground leases. I know that's not going to work for every institutional partner, but from our perspective, as we were looking at new development, mixed-use development coming into this cultural district to help support it and have more eyes on the street, if we continued to own the land, that gave us long-term control over the design and operation to some degree of the new development. And it also gave us a revenue stream that was continuous, as opposed to getting one lump sum payment up front. Now we're getting a market rate ground lease payment over time. And we've done that with two pretty significant developments here in the circle. So that's really helped the organization. But we're also very lucky to have a very strong fund development team and a lot of support from philanthropy that realizes the benefit of one organization like Midtown Detroit that's working with a number of the cultural institutions and helping make the place, better, that supports all of them as well.
Thanks a lot, Matt. So I maybe want to open that similar question up to Vaughn as well. I know that, with the 11th Street Bridge Park, there's a lot of different ways that both it is organized in terms of how it's set up as a sort of legal entity and land trust, but also the sort of community partners that you have on board and how that kind of funding relationship is set up too.
Yeah, so we look at this project as like $140 million project, but half of that money is going towards the brick and the mortar, and so to date we've raised about, I think it's around $59 million for the capital, and so like 34 plus comes from city funding, and the additional funding comes from naming and sponsorship opportunities that are going to take place. And we've almost raised as much for the equitable development strategies as the bricks and mortar. So we raised about $55 million for that. And all of that has come through philanthropic dollars. And so we have a $5 million grant that we received through JP Morgan Chase, which was the Pro Neighborhood Grant, where you mentioned like some of that funding was going to establishing the Douglas Community Land Trust. Then some of those monies went to small business, and then some of those monies went to workforce programming and training. The JP Morgan was like our largest component of money of that that's not necessary. That's not true. That went directly into the equitable development strategy. $50 million came from LISC DC. And so LISC helped us very early on with people power to create our equitable development strategies and to help with the planning. And they were so impressed by it. They pledged $50 million into the surrounding community, or what we called our impact area, which was a 1 mile radius around the park. And to date, the last I saw, I think they had invested about $40 million so far. It might be more than that now, but so yeah, all of those dollars have been through philanthropic dollars, but the bricks and the mortar, some of that has been through private funders as well as city funding.
That's great. I also maybe want to segue to think a little bit about the kind of role that you anticipate sort of technology continuing to play kind of in this new sort of hybrid landscape that we're entering into, sort of post-pandemic. Like Vaughn, as you mentioned, you've got an event that's coming up virtually this Sunday, but then also we're beginning to extend into hopefully nicer weather than I have today. But as we begin to sort of think about welcoming folks back and creating those sort of like really creative and compelling visitor experiences and opportunities to engage, what role do you kind of see technology playing in either supporting that welcoming, being able to gather safely again in public? And then also, how are you thinking about how it can sort of build and strengthen the visibility for both the project and the park, as well as UCI as a whole? So that's kind of open to both of you as we get some more questions on deck.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. I think that One of the things UCI as an organization has done for a number of years is a summer concert series. It's called Wade Oval Wednesday on our Wade Oval Central Park. We've welcomed upwards of 4,000, 5,000 people on a Wednesday night for a free concert. And you see them coming in from the neighborhoods with their wagons and their strollers and their dogs. And it's just an incredible opportunity for people to get together, but they're sitting very close together on blankets, in the lawn, listening to a show, having dinner. And we obviously had to stop that last year, much to people's chagrin. We're really struggling with, can we do something like that again this year? And if so, how do we control it as we're still trying to get vaccinated and trying to get that herd immunity and trying to make people feel safe and comfortable? There's absolutely some people who are ready to go. I saw a question in the chat about if there's fatigue because of the pandemic. I think the answer is absolutely yes. We have a 70-degree day today in Cleveland, and people are just dying to get out in safe ways. But I think to make sure that we are continuing to ensure people's safety, we're going to have to forego the live concert series one more year, or else maybe look at doing it at the very end of the summer again, depending upon how things open up in Ohio and what the rules are. But there's just no easy way that we can think of that we can either limit the number of people who are coming to see a show like that, or space them in a way that they would be safe, even if, we know everybody won't be vaccinated, at least not immediately. So we're doing well in Ohio, but I think we've got to figure out other ways that we can have smaller events. And so we're pivoting a little bit to a new program that we're going to roll out called Yay Saturdays. And it's really focused on families and children, and not necessarily coming for one specific time frame, but doing something throughout an entire Saturday, where we would work with our institutions to have tents outside, to have activities, but space it out more so that people can come at different times, move from one area to the next in a smaller group setting, and really working with the schools to get the families to come and bring their children, as opposed to just advertising it and marketing it, broadly for the entire community. Of course, it will be open to everybody, but we really want to work with the residents that live in the neighborhoods around us that, again, are missing out on these opportunities that we used to be able to provide because we just can't have major events. So not sure yet how we'll use technology to enhance that experience. I think we still want to figure out ways, but I do know that, as I said earlier, and I think Vaughn said too, we've reached more people for sure through technology. So it is going to be an arrow that's in our quiver going forward, no matter what. And certainly, as we have bad weather in the wintertime, it's a great way to bring people together in a safe way. But I think as we get into warmer weather, we want to figure out ways that we can get people back outside doing active things and doing them in a safe way.
Yeah, just to add to what Debbie was saying, it certainly is one more arrow that we have in the quiver, and it's not, as we look to transition out of this pandemic space, the question is not what either or, but it's how do we do both, right? And so, like, if we are live streaming something, or if we are doing something live, can we also stream it so that people that can't make it to the event see it as well? If I have a class, are there opportunities for me to have both in-person classes as well as online classes? And so really just starting to think different ways about how we can offer programming, and what were some lessons learned that we could take from over the last year. And what was working really well, and how can we continue to carry those things again, in a post pandemic world. And as it relates to Olga's question around just fatigue, yes, we certainly see. I really think we see more fatigue within staff, in meetings and all of those things. In terms of our events, it's actually been an increase in folks that have been participating. And I don't have any data to back this up, but I would think it's because people are tired of all of the meetings And it's like, here's something different. And as long as it's something relevant and interactive, people will be more inclined to participate in it. Now, as I say that, we were doing a lot of that while the weather was cold. As we are moving into warmer weather, I would expect that, a lot of folks just want to get outside and do some events, where they're not stuck in the house.
So I'm Olga Stella with the College for Creative Studies, an organization called Design Corps. And we do a lot of public design festival programming and other events. And so are there any virtual event techniques that you found that are helping to create that sense of interaction and that engagement? Given the things that you mentioned about just the people being tired of all the Zoom meetings and everything, and then how do you make these kinds of community engagement opportunities and cultural events more fun and more interactive? If there's any techniques that you've seen that we would benefit from.
I've seen two different techniques work. One is to be able to pre-record a video, and then you're showing it. But while you're showing it, you have somebody in the chat, and like whether it's the panelists or somebody can respond to them, as they are asking the question. And so any of us that have been panelists know how difficult it can be to try to present and to answer a question. And so that just, that's an opportunity for you. You can, the recording's already shown and you can just respond to them directly. Something else that we've done is, so we have a staff of about 6 on our team, and we have designated roles to so one person might be the host, another person might be dealing with the technical logistics. Another person is dealing with responding to, or we might have 2 people dealing with responding to questions directly. So we just put a lot of thought into those roles prior to the event, so that we can try to cover all of our bases and folks can get immediate responses from us.
So unfortunately, these are lightning quick talks. We could continue to talk, but we have to transition to our next group of fantastic folks. So we're going to move into the next panel. And this is an opportunity to really sort of dig in deep to sort of both how we think about landscape and also programming specifically within kind of larger cultural districts. Again, we're reinforcing this idea that we're all part of these landscapes together. We all have different kind of organizations, but we want to have an opportunity to sort of really think about programming and programming that connects to neighborhood and residents and communities. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Michelle to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here. And I want to thank Debbie and Vaughn for their presentations. I really enjoyed learning more about their work and hearing about the shared challenges that we're all having in this really difficult time. I'm Michelle Boone. I'm the Chief Program and Civic Engagement Officer at Navy Pier. Navy Pier is one of the top destinations in the Midwest that features acres of park grounds, performance spaces. We're home to a children's museum, a Shakespeare theater company, and Chicago's public radio station. We have a trade show floor, a grand ballroom. We just recently opened a new hotel, believe it or not. There are restaurants and retail. There's a mini amusement park. So it is truly a multifaceted, dynamic campus that juts out about a mile into Lake Michigan and has been a part of Chicago's history for more than 100 years. Now, over that time, the pier has had multiple identities. It started as a nature recreational space that was available to the citizens to offer a bit of respite to city dwellers to come out and enjoy the lakefront. It then became a naval training base when the war broke out, hence the name Navy Pier. It was a university. It was the site for the very first Chicago campus of the University of Illinois. At one time, it served as the city's primary trade show venue, and then it fell into years of neglect and abandonment. It was then revitalized and used for a site for concerts, music and food festivals, and eventually, kind of morphed into this, really tacky Carnival by the Lake with a heavy emphasis on amusements. But slowly, the transformation of the pier morphed into a cultural destination and really a cultural district all of its own. It began to take shape with the two important cultural institutions becoming anchors at the pier, the Chicago Children's Museum and then the Chicago Shakespeare Theater making their home on the site. And then 10 years ago, Navy Pier moved from being what was really kind of a quasi-government entity to an independent nonprofit. So the bulk of our budget is generated from earned revenues, revenues from parking, rents, retail sales, private events, trade shows, and fees and ticket sales through the amusements. But we also rely on contributed income from sponsorship and philanthropy. We receive virtually no public funding. And the pier continues to be a free admission, so it remains highly accessible to all. About 6 years ago, I was invited to join the team to help build a slate of public programs, cultural and arts programs to help reconnect the pier back to its citizens, to shift the public perception of it being kind of this tourist destination or a tourist trap to one that Chicagoans could once again embrace. And the idea was to do that through programs, through partnerships with an established with the slate of performing arts organizations and artists, and then present their work on our stages. So prior to my arrival, there was a very extensive 18-month public engagement process where a consultant was hired to meet with cultural leaders, community groups, artists, performers, most of them in Chicago, but they also spoke with people around the globe, people that were leading public spaces to learn more about best practices as well as the challenges. And we also engaged the people that were guests of the pier. But most importantly, we wanted to talk more to the people who weren't coming to find out why and what it would take to make them feel welcome. So all of this was happening at the same time that there was this massive physical transformation that was taking place, adding more acres of green space, adding multiple state-of-the-art outdoor performance areas and platforms. And all of that was supported with an aggressive rebranding and marketing campaign to, again, push out the message that this was the new Navy Pier. This is not the space or the site that you thought you knew from when you might have visited on a school trip, 20 years ago. The pandemic, of course, brought an abrupt halt to all of the progress that was being made. We were fortunate to be one of the few cultural organizations, and I think last year the only one on the lakefront that was allowed to open last summer. And part of that was because we had so much open public space. Even with that, we only saw a very small fraction of the audience that we would typically draw. So we worked really hard to kind of reinforce the message around safety and wellness, the procedures that were being in place to ensure that people were going to be safe when they came back to the pier. So, a campaign around all the different sanitation adjustments that were being made. We retrained lots of our guest experience and services staff to function as social distancing ambassadors, to be on site to encourage guests to maintain their safe distances and to wear face coverings. Prior to the opening, we had done, I would say, virtually no virtual programming. And so this need to engage audiences in a new way came at a time also when our staffing had been reduced dramatically and resources were, very, very thin. So the challenge of wanting to stay connected, how do you use these new virtual tools to push out your programming so that you don't lose the audiences and that when you do reopen, that the people are still there and interested. But the peer experience is not one that's easily transferable to a virtual one. While we could be creative in launching some new programs that would keep us connected to the audience base You know, the peer experience is an experiential one. It's about being there physically at the space. So we did launch a couple of, interesting new virtual programs that, had a good attendance for us to kind of venture out into this thing on its own. But I have to say, the way that we have found technology to be most useful through this is the way we're able to collect data and tracking of the way in which people that are coming back to the site after the post-pandemic, how are they moving through the space? How long are they staying at one location before they move to the other? We were able to really monitor the density of people and crowds. And so we would know if people were not abiding by the social distancing rules, we could swoop in with our guest experience staff and then re-encourage people to kind of spread out. Or if a performance was happening and there was a dense crowd congregated, we tell the performers maybe to take a break so that the crowds could disperse. But technology, I think, is more than just about the virtual programming. It's ways of how the technology can help inform us to do a better job of managing crowds, learning about the flow, how people are gravitating, for how long are people staying at one spot before they move on to the next. And then where are the gaps and the holes, and what might be the opportunities for us to program in those areas so that people are really taking advantage of the entirety of the pier. One of the other challenges, I'll just say real quickly, for us with the move into virtual programming is that, we didn't want to half-ass it, right? And so you want to make sure that you have people who really know how to put a program together. Or can we produce a video work that's going to be compelling? Because there's so much competition. It's not just about the Zoom fatigue. Everybody is pushing out digital content. And so how do you keep the bar high so that what you're doing is compelling, it's interesting, it's engaging, and that you're not turning off people with a subpar product. I think I'll maybe pause there to allow our next panelist speak.
My name is Mauricio Garcia. I'm the Chief Program and Engagement Officer with the Highline in New York City. I'm excited to be here. I should also say that I'm a native Detroiter, Metro Detroiter. I want to be very conscious of that. But I did live on Cass and Willis for several years before I moved to the city. And so this area that you all work in is very near and dear to my heart, and I go often. And so a little bit transitioning back to New York, a little bit about the Highline. We're both a public park and a nonprofit on the west side of Manhattan. And through our work with communities, both on and off the Highline, we're dedicated to really thinking about the role public spaces and open spaces have in creating connected, healthy neighborhoods and cities. And I'll just qualify that when I say reimagining the role public spaces, and it's plural, is that beyond just our Highline, our public space in New York City, we're also working creatively and collaboratively with other public spaces around the country who are rethinking or reimagining the use of underutilized or abandoned infrastructure. That includes collaborating with Vaughan and the 11th Street Bridge. That means working with the 606 in Chicago. And that also means working with the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy around the 606. And so we're kind of collaborating and having a peer-to-peer learning approach around that. So there's a little bit there around kind of the digital transformation piece I'll get to in a second. But a core to our mission at the Highline is really serving as both a physical and structural connector, as well as a connector to people, of people to people, culture, resources, and civic engagement. And on the west side of Manhattan, we play a pretty outsized role, and I would say we play a pretty outsized role in the city of New York. And we recognize that. There's a lot of value that is generated both economically and socially through the arts and otherwise because of the Highline and because of our partnerships with our partners. We're really committed to building and nurturing long-term supportive relationships with our neighbors, with our community-based organizations, with other civic and cultural institutions, but particularly with our neighbors who have traditionally been or historically been underserved and underrepresented, particularly on the west side of Manhattan. That's been experiencing so much tremendous growth over the last 2 decades alone. And we see ourselves as critical to serving as a catalyst for equitable community development. And so my role, really, just to kind of give you a little bit of context, similar to Michelle's, we have almost the same exact title. My role is to really oversee all of our public programming on and off the park. That includes any sort of our public art program throughout the 1.5 miles of the High Line. That includes our education programming, school partnerships in and out of schools, both after school and in school, as well as a youth development program, which is a youth and career development program that uses kind of a STEAM model, thinking about kind of the architecture and design and art and civic engagement that kind of brought the High Line to life as kind of our inspiration. And I also oversee all of our community and government engagement. And so that means, what sort of relationships do we have with our community stakeholders, both the deep-pocketed ones as well as the folks who've been here for generations who have not been part or have not been asked to be a part of a lot of the programming or activities or solutions that may take place in the neighborhood. And that kind of goes in line with kind of how we approached the digital transformation piece as a result of COVID. So go back last year, March 16th, the High Line closed its doors. So literally the High Line has doors. We have stairs that go up to the railway, and we have gates. And so in the morning, we typically open them up. And then at night, we would close them pre-pandemic. And I will just give you a snapshot. And I think, if I remember correctly, Michelle, I think Navy Pier had 9 million people. I think that's a correct figure. The High Line had 8.3 million people in 2019. And so our problem in 2019 and before was overcrowding. The secondary, and I think almost even a more important problem we were facing pre-pandemic was, a lot of our local residents, especially our public housing residents, were not going to the High Line. They were not seeing it as their park, or it was too crowded, it was too touristy, there's not enough New Yorkers. It was a place to take for folks out of town to go and enjoy it. It's a pretty great space. During the pandemic on March 16th, we had to close those doors. And so it was a difficult decision. We consider ourselves a park, an open space, open democratic open space, that even though we do have a gate and then we close at night, we always open every day, 365 days a year. So it was a difficult decision to actually come to the conclusion to close. It was to ensure the safety of our visitors. We're a very narrow walkway, and also to our staff. And it was very unknown. It's still unknown, but even if we recall back then, it was very unknown as to kind of how everything would play out. 3 months later, we reopened in July of last year. And in the 3 months between our closure and our reopening, we had the time to reflect on what things would we do differently using digital technologies, using the feedback of our local residents, the feedback of our community-based organizations, of our faith-based institutions, and so on. So we actually spent those 3 months on one end pounding, I wouldn't say pounding pavement, but pounding Zoom, right? Going on a bunch of Zoom calls, holding a series of community meetings, meeting residents that I think Vaughn and a couple others have mentioned. We actually were able to deepen our relationships with a lot of folks because if we think about some of our senior population, we are a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. A lot of folks don't make it to the High Line, or if they make it to the High Line, it's an actual planned activity, and we're not able to have meetings that they can attend to regularly. So we were able to connect with them in their rooms, in their homes, by way of digital technologies, by way of Zoom and by Meet and all these other platforms. And so we were really able to just present to them, get their insights, glean their expertise because they're community experts, and then go back to them again, incorporate some of those in our thinking about programming, about operating, about reopening. And we did that with a number of Black associations, tenant associations, artist groups. Chelsea's a big, is a big artist community, a lot of our public housing residents, and so on. So initially, the use of digital allowed us to really go into people's homes and build that relationship and that trust. We had some of that but folks were suspicious of the High Line. There's a lot of that's been written about the High Line. I think this allowed us to really kind of build that kind of that real relationship, oddly enough. And then when we were able to open, we had incorporated all the protocols that you can imagine, more similar to a museum than, say, your traditional park or open space. We used a timed entry reservation system to make sure that we could manage crowds, and we were able to have enough social distancing. We had one entrance to the park at our southernmost point, and all other access points were exits. And we used the off-the-shelf technology, Eventbrite, everyone uses it these days, to be able to manage the flow. And we weren't sure how this would go because, again, we are a park and we didn't want to kind of go. We didn't want to have people see us as not being available and accessible. But there's obviously a pro and a con to this. The pro was that people were able to enjoy the High Line in the way that they have never been able to enjoy, or at least not in the last several years. It was a calm. They almost owned their space. They were able to enjoy the horticulture, the views of the city, of the river that's right next to us. And at the same time, that technology, and we did a series of surveys, this technology kind of helped folks. It was an added almost security. Like if they used it and they signed up, they knew they were able to social distance. We trained all our staff on, all the protocols, PPE, et cetera. But the digital piece really helped us kind of understand not just how to manage the day-to-day, but understand the sentiment. So at the conclusion of a visit, we would share a survey with them. And oddly enough, a lot of people filled out the survey and they kind of share their sentiment of, this was an experience we've never had before on the High Line, and we're going to come back and we're going to tell our families and our residents. And then, so, we've started to iterate it on that. And right now we're kind of a hybrid of pre-pandemic and current, but this is allowing us the time to really think about how could we continue with these kind of approaches, these new operating models, if you will, or kind of make small tweaks so that the experience doesn't feel overcrowded or doesn't feel like you don't belong there. And those are very big, important considerations for us. The other piece I will talk about is around programming. Similar to what other folks have mentioned, we have a partnership with schools in the neighborhood. We do kind of STEAM. We have STEAM curriculum, and it had been all in person. Our educators were, every day was a new piece of information from the school system, whether or not it would be in person, virtual, how the kids would be able to access, what platforms to use. So the educators needed sort of a third party to be able to just say, we have this, we have a curriculum, we can do it. And so we kind of just served in that capacity and continued our programming online, using Zoom, to be honest. And it was a great way to help kind of alleviate the burden on our educators. We have a teen program or a youth development program, as I mentioned. It's a paid, living wage program, skill building around art, design, architecture, and civic engagement. We continued that online via Zoom. And, at first we weren't sure how this would work, but we were able to have a lot of the projects that the events and activities that the young people would produce on the line, they were able to do that virtually and be able to engage other young people from around, not just the neighborhood, but throughout the city. And then lastly, for us, we are an anchor institution, and we wanted to really kind of double down on that and use our space, whether it was the physical space or the virtual space, to be able to highlight other groups. We, like many other cultural institutions or civic nonprofits, struggled with the budget, right? There was a hit to our budget, to our fundraising, but we're fortunate to be in a position we are financially. And so we knew other, particularly human services organizations, youth organizations, didn't have that they were shoestring budgets. So we used the High Line to be able to have outdoor learning experiences for some of the local groups, socially distant. We were able to close off a certain section, which we haven't done in the past. We have to have parks approval, but we were able to do that. We were able to use our digital channels to really promote our local businesses who are being hit hard. And so we did a heavy push on that. We're continuing to do that. We're working with our local, the local bids, the local chambers. And then, we were able to take part in a lot of digital or virtual kind of fundraising for some of our human services organizations,
Right.
as I mentioned.
Right. That's great. I mean, so much between the two of you, and that I just want to dig in on. I mean, we heard a little bit about like new ways of sort of thinking about sort of tracking and really making the visitor feel safe using both off-the-shelf technologies that we all know about and platforms like Eventbrite, but also just the way that we sort of really think about how technology can sort of reinforce the very experiences and the very trust building that we're hoping to do. So I'm going to sort of kick things off, and then we're going to really immediately move into our questions because people finally stopped being shy and we have so many on deck. But I think I want to start with this idea of how do you balance the sort of fee versus free versus like really trying to build trust for your programming through the kind of virtual space, while also not sort of compromising on quality. I think that's something that both of you said, that like if we're not actually delivering compelling experiences, we're going to lose the audiences. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you've navigated that, and then we're immediately going to move into our first question from George. Michelle, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, it's for us, the free programming is really about the engagement and extending the welcome. The partners that we select to present are really deliberate in the choices that we make, because it's about who has an audience that we are disconnected from. Who is it that we're not reaching that can help us extend the welcome to new communities, and then help elevate in the process the work that they're doing. So one of our longtime partners, the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, there's a huge Puerto Rican community in Chicago, but they were not coming to Navy Pier. And so bringing their program to the pier on this magnificent outdoor stage in this setting, introduced their audience or reconnected their audience to Navy Pier, right? And so they could come have a free family experience. If they wanted to go ride the Ferris wheel, they could do that. And then also, I should have said, there are like 6 public transportation buses that come directly to the pier. So, one of the gripes would be, oh, it's so expensive to park there. Well, you don't have to park. You can take a bus to the pier. Uber and Lyft are becoming more and more popular modes. Well, of course, that was all pre-pandemic modes of transportation. But the balance for us is not about, we don't look at free public programming as a way to generate revenue. This is about the engagement. It's about the partnership. It's about building audience. The revenue pieces are going to be there, but what we're trying to do is to find a point of entry for communities that have been, for a variety of reasons, disconnected to the pier. And so the programs are kind of that link, that glue.
Yeah, Mauricio, I wonder if you could share a little bit about your experience of that sort of same dynamic. And then we're going to get George ready.
Sure, and I agree. I think, the highlight, all of our programming is free, including the work that we do in schools. A lot of times the kind of work that usually the curriculum we have is paid, but we do it free as well. And I couldn't agree more with Michelle's comment. It's engagement, right? We as large cultural institutions, there's a responsibility to the many communities that surround us or are around in our city. And so for us, it's about that social fabric. It's about that social connection. And obviously we want to make the programming, people-centered and informed by the folks that we serve. And so that engagement helps also elicit some sort of the ideas and input to be able to have the type of programming that folks really, really want. Oftentimes, you have programs you may not, folks may not want. And so how are we actually making them better and more, you have your iPhone, they keep updating it for a reason. I mean, maybe there's a monetary aspect to it, but we want to be able to be responsive to the needs and wants and desires of folks.
And I'll say that was a real mind shift for even the leadership at the pier, because, you know, the board and leadership, you know, they were very revenue focused. And so it did take some time to really understand and to, you know, it's like, well, okay, we're a nonprofit, number one, there's an obligation and a responsibility to make the space accessible to all. If it's part of our mission statement, we have to honor that, and to help educate them that free public programs is a pathway to more than just sales for the pier.
I think Anne Marie also has questions around kind of collaboration and trust building, both amongst kind of the peer and stakeholder institutions, but also residents. So I'm going to let Anne Marie kick things off, and we're going to slowly start bringing all the rest of tonight's panelists back on screen so that we can get some final thoughts in. But Anne Marie, why don't you ask us our question?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to hear if you guys had any better techniques that you could share with us about making sure that our residents and various community organizations feel like they're being listened to and truly engaged throughout our process, our planning process. We are very aware that we don't want people to feel like we're just checking a box to host meetings, but what are some of the things that we can do to make sure that we are ensuring that our residents feel like they're being listened to?
Prior to joining Navy Pier, I was the commissioner for cultural affairs in Chicago, and we did a cultural plan. And we had a, you know, public engagement process, lots of meetings, town halls all around the city. And after the meetings, we did a number of kind of pushing back out on the website and say, did we hear you right? Here's what we collected from this meeting. Did we get everything? Are we capturing what you said correctly? What's missing? So there was this constant back and forth and the dialogue to, you know, say, okay, we think we heard this. Is that right? And then when we got to the point to where we were ready to draft the plan, we actually put the draft out there and said, all right, this is what we're thinking. Y'all down with this? Is this right? Speak now, let us know what your thoughts are, and had that up for a while, took that back, mined it, retooled it, and then went back and said, okay, here's the second draft. What do you think? Are we headed in the right direction? So there was this constant back and forth, and it wasn't just about the physical meetings, but putting it out and letting people know that there was a website, keeping an open portal so that even if you missed a meeting, you could continue to provide feedback or suggestions and ideas. And by the time the plan was released, there was nothing new or surprising in there that people hadn't been exposed to already.
And I would just add my 2 cents is, yeah, going back and forth for a while, you know, and not just, I think I would just add that explaining or stating why certain things were not incorporated. You know, it's good to be upfront about, you said you wanted X, we didn't use X because this, and whether or not they're like, oh, we get it, thank you. It may not be that easy, but at least you were transparent about it. The other thing I would add is, as many, you know, I always say the usual suspects are the easy ones to go to every time. You know who they are. They're the loudest voices, so the most connected. And so who are those unusual suspects? And it usually takes a trusted messenger for you to get to those unusual suspects, because oftentimes they haven't been asked to be a part of a process. They may not know how to get involved in the process. And so that takes time and effort. And, you know, a lot of organizations don't have the patience for that. But in order to really have, you know, in order to really kind of build that framework and that kind of trust, you need to do that. That is absolutely necessary.
All right, so we are going to shift into some final thoughts from all of our guests tonight. So I'm going to kick things off. really quickly with the idea that when we talk about the digital or when we talk about the virtual, what we're really talking about are just means to be connected to and engaged with the folks that we're really trying to welcome and serve through our cultural institutions and our civic institutions and how they're bound together by place. So my final thought is really that digital is another layer that we have to think about programming and programming intentionally, but the goals are still the same. It's really to reach in and sort of have opportunities to connect with people in place. So I will send it to Vaughn, and we will just go from there in terms of circling around final thoughts.
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for a wonderful panel. Certainly it was a pleasure to be a part of this panel. My final thought would just be, wherever I go, I try to just share, like, we believe that the solutions are always in the community. And so, solicit feedback, continue to keep that feedback loop open with the residents, with stakeholders, and they'll let you know what you need. They'll let you know what platforms are best. They'll let you know what programming is more relevant for them. And as long as you keep those lines of communication open, you can provide programming that is relevant, accessible, and interactive with your intended audience.
Yeah, I echo Yvonne. Thank you, everybody, for having us on this panel. I really learned a lot, and I thought it was really interesting. My closing thought is that I think, surprisingly, technology actually broke down some barriers. It made entry less intimidating and more welcoming for people that otherwise might not have felt welcome in certain places. And it allowed us to reach a much broader audience. And so I think going forward, we need to continue to use technology in that way and to take advantage of the opportunities it provides us, that not everybody feels comfortable going to a space, experiencing a certain institution or opportunity. And so getting them that information or helping them go through the technology door is just another way to bring people in and help enrich our experience and their experience as well.
I would say use the technology now for the way you imagine you want people to use the campus. Like, it can exist now, today. You don't have to wait for the physicality of the campus to be complete. Like, virtually, you can have that. And so how can you use technology to kind of introduce and plant the seed and get people using the campus in the way that you imagine it right now? And that might help actually inform the way you finalize your physical plans, because of the ideas that are going to be generated from people once they start to use it.
And this is personal in a way. Like, I know this part of Detroit, and so there's such all of you play such an important part to in terms of the arts and culture and to the civic side, to the civil society of the city of Detroit and Metro Detroit and beyond. And so, understanding the important role you play in all of Detroit is huge, and having the digital side be a tool for that is critical. And just being mindful that it is a tool. You still, when we're able to, there's still the block parties that you need to go to and meet the folks. You need to be able to go to your coffee shops, your barber shops. You need to do that. And the digital is a tool to help facilitate that. And like I said before, it'll help you go in someone's living room, maybe, from a digital perspective, but it is only a tool. So just being mindful of that. But I just echoed like what Michelle just said, like, start now using that as, even using the bad word of brand, talking about how all of you are going to be working together now and seeing how that might manifest itself when we do start opening up and people start going downtown more often and going to these amazing institutions. But again, it's a tool to be able to do your work, your everyday work, better and quicker in some cases.
And may I add just one quick thing? I know we've been talking about community, but there's one community in particular that has really, I think, had to use technology in ways that others don't necessarily think about, and that's the disability community. Yeah. And so don't just think about your community by the people that you imagine are most immediate in the neighborhood or the community of people that you imagine are going to come to the space, but the disability community has had to be really creative and rely on technology for a very long time. And so there could be some learnings for how they think about technology with cultural spaces that could be really informative to your process.
That's great. We're going to bring Anne Marie on for a final thought as well from MDI.
I'm reminded in trying to develop intentional, authentic programming that some of the best partnerships that we might have are amongst our own institutions. And I think that's the low-hanging fruit that a lot of us forget, that we could easily begin working together this year to develop new outdoor programming to really begin safely welcoming people back. And hopefully de-electricity will provide that opportunity for us to experiment with some of those ideas. And that's my final thought. I'm going to pass it back over to you, Suzanne.
My name is Susanna Bishop. I am the Chief Experience Officer of Fed Square. I'll look after the end-to-end customer experience delivery. Fed Square is considered by Melburnians and Victorians in Australia as the place to come, the place to meet others and start their journey in the city and in the state. We do tend to see people come into the square to celebrate big moments, whether in the sporting scene, whether it is a particular culture celebration, or they come as well to support each other. So it might be a vigil or it might be something happening around the city that really brings people together. So as you may have heard, Australia was very fast to introduce control for the pandemic. Being an iconic destination and public space, we had to simply stop any physical activity happening in the square. Very quickly that created two concerns for us. How do we sustain the business and how do we keep brand awareness alive and don't leave, and ensure that people are thinking of the square and connecting with the square during this time that they can't come to the square. We looked at a marketing and programming team to really take the lead on shifting a lot of those experiences to a digital platform, and we've launched the digital square. We looked at things that were really valued by our community, you know, doing Tai Chi in the square at a certain day or having a meditation session, coming to celebrate a particular culture through the variety of festivals that we do. Our programming team reached out and had a lot of conversations with people that normally would bring their events, and the possibility of digitalizing some of those experiences. We had the Tai Chi and yoga and different health and wellness activities recorded from some of our facilities, and we really looked at the architecture of the website to enable an experience where people would arrive and feel okay, just like you would arrive and make your way to the middle of the square, you arrive at our landing page and you make your way into a certain location that offers you that wellness. So that served two purposes for us. People would continue to connect and relate and have experiences, albeit not being able to have them on site. So Fed Square is home to 3 cultural institutions, one being the Moving Image Museum, a national gallery of Australia, and also the Koori Heritage Trust, which represents experiences and history of the Kulin Nations, First Nations of Australia. Whilst 2 of those cultural institutions had the resources to digitalise some of their offering and have that available online, the Koori Heritage Trust didn't. So we were able to support them at that time and bring some of their collection to life and enable them to be present within our digital space, and that meant a lot to demonstrate the destination as a whole and not just one experience singled out. I think the success for us was enabling our ecosystem of partners to get through a very difficult time. It also enabled a new path for Fed Square, which is to continue digitalizing content and building a library of experiences that can be accessed from anywhere in the world. We always had to desire to understand what a digital square could look like, and necessity made us jump into that new world much quicker. We had terrific response because we enable a lot of our partners to bring content that they wouldn't otherwise not have had the chance to produce. We've produced over 200 pieces of content over a period of 3 to 4 months. We had an incredible amount of visitation, not only local but interstate and international, which normally, it's not as easy to get to Fed Square. During a pandemic, we do get a lot of visitors over the year, but during the pandemic, we were able to get people that wouldn't be able to come physically to participate in what we do. I think digital will continue to be an enabler, and digital will continue to be an enhancer of the experience. I don't think we'll ever replace it. I think experiences that create memories are required all your senses, and you can't have a screen in between. So an experience that you can have by attending a cultural event or connecting with community is really special, and will never be fully replaced by technology, but technology has enabled us to create a safer COVID-19 environment where people can connect to the destination without being in crowds, having an experience utilising technology, and I think we'll grow in that space. How can we bring technology to have people connecting through augmented reality, virtual reality, or doing their own tour of Fed Square, but also present in Fed Square. So we'll look at technology as an enhancer into the future. And I think a lot of other creative spaces will continue to use technology in better ways because of the pandemic. I think becoming storytellers is of incredible importance to any organisation in a creative space. And I believe that's the lessons that we've taken over the past year, is that we need to continue to tell a story, and we need to adapt the way that we tell a story, where something has worked really well physically now needs to work really well digitally. As soon as restrictions eased, Fed Square was ready to welcome people. At the same time, Fed Square was really conscious that the consumer sentiment was impacted by COVID-19. So the way that we curated experiences took that into consideration. The first thing we did was create a Fed oasis, where we had round fake grass placed within the square, distributed around. Each grass area had its own umbrella and deck chairs and an environment for people to come and have their own space separate from others, enjoy a lot of the activities on our digital facade, which is a very large screen that is curated with programming throughout the day, and QR codes to enable people to order food from the variety of outlets within our precinct and have the food delivered to them. We also look at creating experiences where people can do at any time of the day, so they don't have to come at one time where big crowds will be in. So for instance, we looked at bringing music acts throughout the day. So you don't just need to come in at 7 o'clock, There'll be other sessions for you to come and attend. Do it at your own time. Do it with the people that you love and do it in a safe way. So we're really lucky in Australia and in particular in Victoria, where we have a local government and council that's really understanding of the impact to the economy that the pandemic has. Our role and responsibility is to work with government to make sure that the destination is safe, that we have hygiene practices in place, and that we have a COVID-safe plan that enables events to run in the safest possible way. I believe that event organisers are hungry to come back and bring their events. They are, however, concerned about bringing an event and suddenly having an outbreak and what it means for contracts and what it means to resources and planning. So we are feeling that there is hesitation, there's desire, but there's hesitation at the same time. But we feel that as vaccines roll out and the confidence in event organisers will continue to grow, and the desire of people in general to experience something that they've been unable to for the past 12 to 18 months will have a really big impact. And before no time, we'll see big crowds coming back as they are allowed.
So we're going to ask you to save the date. These are going to be, as we said, a series of 6 conversations. Our next one is coming up in 2 weeks' time, and it's going to be of public interest. This is an opportunity for us to really think about sort of how we're thinking about outdoor programming, how they connect to public Wi-Fi, and what are the kind of interactive experiments that we can have and hold in space, particularly around this idea of how do we reframe justice and public space in terms of both monuments and memory making. So we have a few amazing speakers already confirmed, but we hope you will join us for our next Transformer Series event. So I just want to thank everyone again. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank John Marshall, who has been running the tech for tonight's evening, my co-founder and partner at Rooter too. And I also want to thank Elizabeth Vanderveen, our design strategist and researcher, who's been manhandling and wrangling the tech on the chat side. So without further ado, I'm just going to say thank you so much. This has been the first kickoff event for the Transformer series. We hope to see you all back for the next one, and we hope to remain connected to our guests and panelists. Thank you so much for joining us.